So let's go in and do a little bit more detailed student loan update on what the hearing was today, which actually is already concluded. It was about a 2-hour hearing in the Eastern District of Missouri. And as you can see here, I pulled up the actual briefing and that was filed. There's 36 pages of it. I'm just going to do two parts. Part one, we're going to go through what the actual complaints are in the outline, and then part two will go through what these states are considering their legal standing, financial standing. So there are 6 states here: Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, and South Carolina. They are the plaintiffs. The defendants are President Biden, Secretary Cardona from the U.S. Department of Education, and the actual Department of Education. So I kind of went through and highlighted a little bit. Basically, they don't think that President Biden has the legal authority to cancel the debt or to relieve millions of individuals from their obligation to pay loans that they voluntarily assumed. That's basically what they're saying. They claim that the administration is not able to achieve this through Congress, so they're trying to justify it through an executive order. And basically, Biden and the U.S. Department of Education and Secretary Cardona are saying that they are going to be using the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Student Act of 2003 to justify the actions that they're taking. And this has been argued both for and against this year and last year, and it's basically falling across party lines. The Democrats are saying the HEROES Act should be used. The Republicans are saying it should not be used. So basically, the Democrats are saying that the HEROES Act can be used because it gives the Secretary of Education the ability to help people who have been hurt by some sort of national disaster. It was initially enacted after 9/11 to help veterans who were having difficulty with their student loans when they were serving. But the Republicans are saying it was never intended for across-the-board debt cancellation, and the Democrats are saying that they can do across-the-board debt cancellation, and it does give them the authority. So I underlined a few different spots just so it's easier for us to follow along. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi declared that people think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. That has to be an act of Congress. The President can't do it, so that's not even a discussion. She said this in 2021, in July of 2021. So this is part of the briefing here because that's evidence that there are people in power who think that this should not have been done. The Office of Legal Counsel said that the HEROES Act was put in place to say that recipients of the loans would have to be put back into a financial position that they were before the national emergency, and that it could only be limited to the harm that had a relation to the borrower's federal loans, no matter how much harm the borrower may have suffered because of a national emergency. So that's kind of an interesting part of the actual briefing because the student loans have actually been put on pause now for almost 3 years, since March 20th of 2020. So if the only way that the HEROES Act can be used to justify mass cancellation is to be able to put the loan recipients back to the point that they were before the national emergency began, the loan recipients really have not suffered financially because of their loans, because the loans, there have been no payments due on any of the loans since March 20th of 2020, and there's been no interest accruing on them. So in regard to any borrower's federal loans, as you'll see later in the briefing, they indicate that they're probably better off. But the mass debt cancellation they're claiming is not tailored to address the effects of the pandemic on the federal student loan borrowers as required by the HEROES Act. They're saying that the Act's objectives and express requirements are distorted because of the political agenda. And they're saying that the political agenda is driving it and not the pandemic. So then they go through a list of the different states and the attorney generals that are suing, well, not suing, but asking for a stay of forgiveness. And they keep going through that. And then we get down to the jurisdictions, just talking about where the actual court filing is taking place. Now, this was kind of interesting. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but apparently in September of 2011, when the Occupy Wall Street movement began, there was also an Occupy student debt campaign, which I don't actually remember, but it encouraged borrowers to default and not pay their student loan payments as a form of protest. And that is not necessarily connected to Senator Bernie Sanders, but I'm certain that he was speaking about it at the time anyway. And he did also organize the Million Student March a number of years later, about 4 years later, where students on 100 college campuses staged a walkout to protest the cost of college, which isn't necessarily related to student loans in itself, because the cost of college, the easier it is to get student loans, the higher the cost of college is going to go. That just makes sense. So anyway, so there's been a number of people who have been in the news talking about student loans. Senator Warren has been asking for about $50,000 worth of proposals for student loan debt cancellation. Senator Sanders wanted all student debt canceled, and a cap put on interest rates. There were a lot of different proposals that were put forward. They've gone through a bunch of the relevant student loan programs, which we don't need to get into here. We can go into it at a different time. It's not as relevant to this particular briefing. Just talked again about Pelosi not thinking that debt forgiveness was possible as through an executive order. And Biden, when he was running for office, did say that he was going to try and do student loan forgiveness through proposed legislation, but there was a long list of legislation that did not work. Many different bills went through. The $50,000 one, another representative, Al Lawson, tried to cancel all outstanding balances on loans for borrowers under a certain income. In February 21, Senator Warren and Chuck Schumer and a number of representatives introduced a resolution that tried to say that the Biden administration did have the power to cancel student debt, but nothing came of that initially. And then now here we are about 18 months later, and we're looking at, in August, he actually put out this proposal. So in March of 2020, Trump did actually use the HEROES Act to pause the student loans, which are currently set to begin again on December 31st, 2020. So the HEROES Act was enacted to pause student loans. And then the CARES Act was what that was called, but the HEROES Act was referenced. So in October of 2021, significant changes through the PSLF waiver were added in. So they're talking a little bit about that in the briefing, as well as the IDR waiver, which was introduced in April of 2022. Both of these waivers caused borrowers that had loans that were called FFELP loans to start consolidating them, which meant that they were taking loans that were under one loan service borrower and transferring them to another loan service borrower. Many of the service providers saw a dramatic increase in applications as borrowers wanted to get into consolidation so that they would be eligible for these two waivers, the Public Service Loan Program waiver and the IDR waiver. So basically, they're citing that the administration was trying to use the pandemic to justify the mass debt cancellation, even as they were saying that the pandemic was basically over. 60 Minutes, he said it. Basically, he had talked about it with immigration, and they were allowing immigrants into the United States because the COVID-19 pandemic was waning. All of these things happened, and they were still in between those two events on August 24th, declaring that COVID-19 was what was justifying mass debt cancellation. So we know that they went through the forgiveness. It's estimated over 40 million borrowers will be eligible. They have to have direct loans to qualify. These FFELP, FFEL borrowers would have to consolidate their privately held loans to be eligible. Now, the Biden administration, the day this came out, prior to this filing coming out, the Biden administration changed that requirement. And as of September 29th, FFELP borrowers were no longer allowed to consolidate their loans to get to be able to qualify for the loan forgiveness program. But many of them had already consolidated for the waivers, the IDR waiver and the PSLF waiver. So, and they have also announced that about 8 million people, the Education Department already has their income information, and they will receive automatic cancellation as soon as the application goes live. So that's a problem, because at this point, once 8 million people receive cancellation, it's going to be pretty hard to prevent other people from receiving cancellation. And the other part of the complaint is that under the mass debt cancellation, many borrowers who made payments during the pandemic would actually get money back. It wouldn't just be a line item that would be crossed off, like as an accounting thing for the debt cancellation, but some of them would get money back if they had made payments during the pandemic. So, and at this point, they're citing that the Wharton School of Business said that it could be about $519 billion over 10 years, or up to $1 trillion with all of the other components of the announcement. And that initially the Education Department was saying that the HEROES Act didn't cover this, but then they changed and they said that it did. So, like I said, that was more along political lines. It was the Trump administration's Education Department that said the HEROES Act would not qualify for mass debt cancellation, and the Biden administrations had said it would. So at this point, the HEROES Act is our major focus, and it was supposed to be the sole focus for members of the United States military. But at this point, the Biden administration and the Education Department is saying that they can use the HEROES Act for a class-wide response to the COVID-19 pandemic and carte blanche forgive all of these loans. Whereas this legal challenge is saying that is not written into the HEROES Act. So at this point, we've pretty much gone through most of what's going on here. The moving forward, they're talking about the HEROES Act not authorizing mass cancellation like we were talking about. What is most significant is that in order for the HEROES Act to be even indicated, relief would have to come to the borrower because they had some financial harm. And unfortunately, relief is coming to the borrower regardless of whether or not their income rose or fell during the pandemic, because they are not determining whether or not their income rose or fell. They are just carte blanche forgiving everything. So basically what they're arguing is that because of the fact that the CARES Act suspended most of the borrower's obligations to make loan payments during COVID-19 and stopped interest from accruing on their loan, and that waiver still remains in place, that the COVID pause on student loans doesn't end until the end of December of this year, most borrowers are better off today than before the pandemic with respect to their student loans, because they have paid nothing for almost 3 years, no interest has accrued, and there's been a rampant increase in inflation. So they didn't miss any of their payments because there were none due. Most of the borrowers accrued no interest because it was zero. And the credit bureaus had been reporting student loans as being on time. So there was really no harm in relation to many borrowers' loans. As a matter of fact, they had found some information that 80% of all student loan borrowers saw their credit scores increase during the pandemic, with the largest increases being among borrowers that had delinquent loans. So they became better off, much better off. Anyway, so there we are. Until now, they've been using the HEROES Act, and this is basically saying they cannot use the HEROES Act moving forward. So moving forward from here, we're going to start talking about why they think this mass debt cancellation is actually going to harm the individual states that are part of this, and we will cover that in part 2.